Welcome to Broken Hearts of Reddit. Get ready to hear a story of betrayal that will chill you to the bone. This is a story about how, in a single day, my seemingly unbreakable happiness turned to dust. Emily and I had been together for 20 years. 20 years of love, mutual understanding, shared joys and sorrows. 20 years that I considered the foundation of my life, its unshakable base. Our life was like a calm river, a slow, measured current, rare ripples, and a steady, peaceful murmur. I was an architect, and Emily owned a small antique shop. We didn't live in luxury, but we always had what we needed for a comfortable life. We had enough for travel, for our favorite Friday night dinners, and for small, impromptu gifts for each other. Most importantly, we had enough of each other. I can still hear her laugh, a clear, sincere sound that felt like home, and her eyes blue as a summer sky in which I saw the reflection of my entire world. She was my anchor, my harbor, my lighthouse in the dark. We made plans for our old age, dreaming of a little house by the sea where we would watch the sunrise, holding hands. Those dreams felt so tangible, so close. Everything changed when her father, Mr. Harris, died. He was a difficult man, distant and always busy, yet incredibly successful. In his youth, he had been in real estate and later made a series of lucrative investments in promising startups. He had never approved of my marriage to Emily. He thought I wasn't good enough for his daughter, that I couldn't provide her with a decent life. But Emily always stood by me, and I was sure of her love. After the funeral, while we were sorting through his things, I noticed that Emily was different. I couldn't put my finger on what had changed. She didn't love me less, nor did she become colder. It was just a new spark in her eyes, a hidden energy. I attributed it to stress and the grief of her loss, as despite their complicated relationship, he was still her father. However, the feeling grew stronger with each passing day. She started staying late at her shop more often, though we had always had dinner together. She spent more time behind the closed door of her father's study, going through his papers. I saw her sitting there for hours, flipping through documents, a smile or a strange thoughtfulness appearing on her face. I offered to help, but she always refused, saying she needed to be alone to process everything. One evening, as I was reading in the living room, she came down from the study. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. She sat across from me, took my hand and said, "Darling, we need to talk." Her voice sounded as if she had rehearsed the line many times. It wasn't our usual warm conversation. It was cold and formal. I felt something inside me tighten into a knot. I still remember how the air in the room froze, how the hands of the antique clock seemed to stop. Something was wrong. Something fundamental in our world had malfunctioned. And even then, on some subconscious level, I knew our calm river had begun its swift journey toward a waterfall. Her words seemed to resonate not in the air, but deep inside me. We need to talk. And even though I had expected it, my heart still skipped a beat. But she didn't talk about us. She talked about the inheritance. She revealed that her father had, in fact, left her an entire fortune, $5 million. His whole empire, all his assets, everything was hers. In that moment, I felt a sense of relief. I thought she was worried about how to manage such a huge sum of money, and that's why she had been so distant. I hugged her and told her we would handle everything together, that it was our shared wealth, our new life. I saw her face soften for a moment, but then she pulled away again. Something cold and unfamiliar flickered in her eyes. The next few weeks felt like a surreal dream. Emily was a different person. She started buying expensive clothes, going to beauty salons, and spending time with people I had never seen before. I tried to talk to her, to ask what was happening, but she would just brush me off, saying she could afford it now, that it was her new life. "You don't want me to wear old clothes, do you, John?" she would say, her tone so caustic, so unlike my Emily. One evening, I came home late. We were supposed to have dinner with her old friend, Daniel, whom she hadn't seen in years. Daniel was a successful financier who lived in another city. I hadn't seen him since our wedding, and even then, he hadn't made much of an impression on me. Emily had taken a long time to get ready, and by the time I arrived, she was already waiting. She stood by the mirror in a stunning black dress I had never seen before. It was from some famous designer and probably cost a month's salary for me. I went to hug her from behind, but she quickly turned away. I tried to kiss her, but she dodged me, saying we were late and had to go. In the car, she was silent, nervously fidgeting with a small clutch. The dinner was tense. Daniel looked at Emily as if she were a precious artifact, and she, in turn, laughed constantly at his jokes, even though they were completely flat. They talked about people I didn't know and events I had no idea about. I felt like I was sitting at a table with two strangers who occasionally cast fleeting, bored glances in my direction. At one point, Daniel said, "Well, Emily, you finally got what you deserved." And this one, he gestured toward me, it looks like he's going to be left with nothing. He laughed, and Emily just smiled. I felt the blood rush to my face. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. I just sat there, watching as two people who I thought were close to me enjoyed my humiliation. When we got home, Emily immediately went to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, that I would wake up and everything would be back to normal. But I didn't wake up. The next day, when I went to the kitchen, there was a letter on the table. I recognized her handwriting. "Dear John, I'm leaving. I can't live with you anymore. I don't want to be with a pauper when I have everything." That was all there was. No explanations, no regrets, no memories, just words, like a point-blank shot. And next to the letter was the key to our house. I stood there, holding these two items, and the world around me seemed to be crumbling. Her words, written in neat handwriting on the paper, were like an icy rain. I read them again and again, trying to find some hint of a joke, a mistake, something that would make it untrue. But her tone, her behavior over the past few weeks, it all formed one terrible, undeniable picture. She was gone. Gone because I was a pauper. To say I was crushed is an understatement. I was destroyed. I wandered our house, which yesterday had been my safe haven, but was now a museum of our memories. I saw her things, her favorite chair, her books, and each of these items seemed to scream of her betrayal. I felt like a complete idiot. How could I not have noticed? How could I have been so blind? I replayed all our 20 years in my mind, trying to find the crack, the exact moment when everything went wrong. But I found nothing. Everything had been perfect, or so I had thought. The image of Daniel kept replaying in my mind, his caustic smile, his condescending look. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was involved. But how? He was her friend, albeit an old one. Could she have traded me for him? The thought disgusted me. I was disgusted with myself for even considering it. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to understand. I needed to know the truth. I began an investigation. No, it wasn't an investigation. It was an obsession. I started looking for traces, any clues that could shed light on what had happened. And I started finding them. First, I found a receipt in her bedside drawer. It was from a jewelry store. The sum was enormous, but the date shocked me. It was 6 months before her father's death. Long before she knew about the inheritance, it made no sense. How could she have afforded such an expensive purchase? I couldn't remember her having such a piece of jewelry. I ran through all her jewelry in my mind, but nothing matched. Then I noticed something else. When we lived together, she always wore old, comfortable slippers, but recently she had started wearing new, expensive ones that I remembered her buying from some elite boutique. These slippers were in the house, but I had never seen her wear them. They were perfectly clean, as if they had never been put on. I looked in our shoe rack, but they weren't there. I found them in her closet, neatly wrapped in silk paper. And finally, I found what completely shattered my faith in our life. I was going through her closet, looking for any clue, anything at all, and I came across a small box. It was locked, but I quickly found the key that always lay in a vase on the fireplace. Inside were old photographs, but they weren't our photos. They were photos of Emily and Daniel. They were young and happy, hugging and kissing. In one of the photos, Emily was holding the very expensive piece of jewelry for which I had found the receipt. Under the photo was a note, written in her hand. "To our little one, born today, I love you, Daniel." My heart stopped. I reread the note, trying to believe it was a mistake. But it wasn't. My wife, my Emily, had been living a double life for 20 years. She had a child with Daniel, and I knew nothing. I closed the box and sat on the floor, my back against the wall. I no longer felt pain or anger. I felt emptiness, an absolute, all-consuming void. In that moment, my mind split in two. One part, the rational part, tried to find an explanation, an excuse, any logical connection that could link my Emily with what I had just seen. The other part, the emotional part, simply screamed in pain. 20 years. 20 years of lies. 20 years of pretense. I felt not just betrayed, but completely gutted. I was a puppet in her theater, and she was a talented director who had masterfully staged her play. I sat on the floor for several hours until the sun disappeared below the horizon and darkness swallowed the room. I didn't cry. The tears just wouldn't come. There was a strange numbness, an emptiness, like after a powerful blow when the pain hasn't yet set in and you just feel shock. I started to remember everything, every word, every gesture, every look, and it all took on a new meaning. Her rare, late-night trips, her strange explanations that she was helping a friend or staying late at the antique shop, her detachment, which I always attributed to fatigue or stress, and I, the naive fool, swallowed it all because I loved her, because I trusted her. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, in this museum of lies. I grabbed my car keys and just drove. I didn't know where. I just needed to disappear. I drove through empty night streets, and only one question was in my head. Why? Why? Why didn't she leave earlier? Why did she keep me by her side? The answer came to me on its own, because of her father's money. She knew I was a pauper and was waiting for the inheritance so she could finally shed this burden. But her father left everything to her, or did he? I remembered his words, his contemptuous looks. He never liked me. He always thought I wasn't worthy of his daughter. But he left everything to her. Did he change his mind after all? Or was she not telling me something? I decided to go all in. I found the number for Emily's father's lawyer, Mr. Stevens, in my phone and called him. It was after midnight, but I couldn't wait. He answered immediately. I told him about my marriage, the inheritance, Emily's words. I spoke quickly, incoherently, trying to convey all my confusion. He listened to me in silence, and then he said, "Mr. Harris left everything to his daughter, but on one condition." And he paused, a pause that felt like an eternity. He left her everything, but only if she divorced you. Otherwise, the entire inheritance would pass to you as her husband. I just couldn't believe my ears. That old cunning fox, Mr. Harris, knew. He knew everything. He knew that Emily was cheating on me, that she had another child. And he decided to play his own game. He gave her a choice, either me or the money. And she chose the money. Everything fell into place. Her strange behavior, her contempt, her leaving. She didn't just leave. She chose me, or rather, my poverty, to get her inheritance. She thought I wouldn't find out, that I would just quietly disappear, leaving her to enjoy her wealth. But she didn't know that I loved her, and that I wouldn't back down until I knew the whole truth. Now, I had an ace up my sleeve. I was no longer just a abandoned husband. I was the heir to $5 million, and I was ready for revenge. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. The condition, the inheritance, the divorce, everything clicked into place. Mr. Harris, who had despised me all his life, had, without knowing it, handed me the perfect tool for revenge. I no longer felt like a poor, abandoned husband. I felt like a player who had been dealt an unexpected but very strong hand. I didn't do anything immediately. I didn't call Emily. I didn't cause a scene. I just waited. I returned to our house, which now felt foreign to me. I didn't go through her things. I didn't touch anything. I just lived in this empty space, in a silence filled with her lies and my knowledge. I imagined her life. She was probably already enjoying her money, her Daniel, and their child. She was probably telling her new friends how boring I was, how I was a pauper, and how she had finally broken free from her chains. A week later, she called. Her voice was cold and distant. "John, I want you to sign the divorce papers." I replied that I was ready to do it, but asked her to come over so we could talk. She agreed, but her tone made it clear that she considered it a waste of time. She arrived 2 days later. She was wearing an expensive coat with a new bag, and she looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. I sat in the living room, in my old armchair, and just watched her. There was not a single drop of regret in her eyes, not a hint of love, only cold calculation. "I brought the documents, John. Just sign them, and we'll be done with this." She placed a thick folder on the table. I picked it up, but didn't open it. Instead, I said, "Are you sure, Emily, that you want us to be done with this?" She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What are you talking about, John? You said you agreed." "I do agree, Emily, but I want you to know one more thing. I want you to read your father's will." Her face changed. The confidence vanished, replaced by anxiety. I stood up and took a sealed envelope from the shelf. It was the copy of the will that I had received from the lawyer. I handed her the envelope. She reluctantly took it, opened it, and began to read. I watched her face change, from surprise to disbelief, from disbelief to shock, from shock to horror. She finished reading and looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. This isn't true." Her voice was trembling. "It is true, Emily. Your father left everything to me, and I'm going to use it." I took the folder with the divorce papers, tore them into small pieces, and threw them at her feet. She stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by shreds of paper. Her mask had fallen. In front of me was not the confident woman who had arrived, but a frightened girl who had just realized she had lost everything. I walked out of the room and headed for the door. She called after me, "John, wait, please." I didn't turn back. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do. I felt no joy in my revenge, no satisfaction. I felt only emptiness, and I knew that emptiness would stay with me for a long time. I hadn't just lost a wife, I had lost 20 years of my life. And no $5 million could ever fix that. After I left Emily, I felt no triumph, only devastation. I drove to the airport, bought a ticket for the first flight I could find, and left. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to disappear. I ended up in a small seaside town where people didn't know my name, where my past was just a shadow. I sat on the shore, watched the waves, and thought. I thought about how everything had turned out, how her greed and betrayal had ultimately led to her downfall. I signed the divorce papers after I had received the inheritance. I did it not for her, but for myself, to finally close this chapter. I sent them to the lawyer, and a few weeks later, everything was finalized. I received a letter from Mr. Feast, Harris's lawyer. It was short, but to the point. All assets, all real estate, everything that had belonged to her father, now belonged to me. I became the heir to $5 million. But this money brought me no happiness. It became a monument to my pain, my lost years. I didn't know what to do with the money. I didn't want to spend it on myself. I decided it had to serve a purpose. I started a foundation to help young architects who couldn't begin their careers due to a lack of funds. I built houses not for the rich, but for those who needed them. And that, surprisingly, brought me some comfort. A year later, I received another letter. It was from Daniel. He wrote that Emily had been left with nothing, that he had found out about the will and had left her as soon as he realized she wouldn't get a cent. He wrote that she was now alone, without money, without a home, and that he had even taken their child from her because she couldn't provide for him. He wrote that she had begged him to come back, but he had refused. He wrote that she was cursing me, calling me a thief and a liar. I read the letter and crumpled it up. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel hate. I felt only emptiness. She got what she deserved. Her greed and selfishness had come back to her like a boomerang. She thought $5 million would buy her happiness, but all it bought her was loneliness. I closed my eyes and pictured her face. She was no longer my Emily. She was a stranger who had stolen 20 years of my life. I let her go. I let go of her lies, her betrayal. I left my past in the past and began to build a new life. On my own terms, with my own money. Money I had earned not as the husband of a rich heiress, but as a man who had survived and not been broken. It's a story about how I once caught her cheating on me with my therapist, but the worst part was their messages. They were discussing how to get rid of me. Our home had never been just a collection of walls and a roof for me. It was a living, breathing organism, the embodiment of peace and permanence. Every corner, every piece of furniture, even the dust on the old bookshelf, everything was imbued with a sense of security, predictability, the very cozy routine that was my synonym for happiness. Mornings began with a ritual I cherished most. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee that Anna, my wife, prepared with special, almost sacred care. She knew my love for that tart, invigorating scent, for the first sip that burned my tongue but warmed my soul. We would have breakfast in the kitchen, flooded with soft, still tender morning light that filtered through the tulle curtains, creating a feeling of weightlessness and purity. We'd exchange plans for the day, light, almost weightless jokes that, over our years together, had become our own private language. Her laugh, a low, melodic sound with a slight huskiness, was the most pleasant sound to me, a confirmation that everything in our world was stable and reliable, that nothing could disrupt this fragile yet strong harmony. I trusted her absolutely, without reservation, as I trusted myself, or perhaps even more. It wasn't just trust, but a deep, unshakable feeling of security, the certainty that I was with a person who would never betray me, never cause me pain, never shake the foundations of my existence. Our evenings were filled with a quiet, almost tangible coziness. Shared dinners cooked with love, watching movies we chose together, arguing and laughing, reading books curled up on the old, worn-out sofa, discussing news that seemed so distant and unimportant against the backdrop of our personal world, or simply enjoying each other's silent presence, which was more eloquent than any words. In this unhurried, measured rhythm of life, I saw the fulfillment of my dream of a happy marriage, of a partnership based on mutual respect, sincere affection, and deep, unwavering understanding. We made plans for the future, talked about the children we wanted to have, dreamed of a house by the sea, of growing old together, hand in hand. Her every touch, every glance, seemed to confirm this unbreakable bond, this absolute certainty in our shared path. I felt truly happy, protected, loved. My work, filled with constant stress and high responsibility, often left me feeling empty, drained to the last drop. I handled complex projects where every decision had serious consequences, and this exhausted me, not only physically, but also mentally. That's why I turned to a psychologist, Dr. Sergey Ivanovich. He was recommended to me by a colleague, a person I trusted implicitly, and whose opinion I always valued. Sergey Ivanovich seemed the epitome of professionalism, calm, thoughtful, with a penetrating gaze that seemed to see right through me, yet didn't judge, but simply understood. His office was an oasis of calm, a place where I could finally breathe, shed the burden of everyday life. Our sessions became a refuge for me, a safe space where I could drop my masks, expose my fears and anxieties, without fear of being misunderstood or judged. I told him everything, about my struggles at work, about childhood traumas that still haunted me, about my deepest fears, and, of course, about my relationship with Anna. I shared every detail of our life together, every nuance of our feelings, every conflict and reconciliation, every moment of joy and every shadow of doubt. He listened attentively, asked precise, sometimes painful questions, and helped me understand myself, my emotions, my reactions. I felt that he was my ally, my guide through the labyrinths of my own consciousness, a person who held the threads of my inner world. He was the one who helped me maintain balance, preserve harmony in my life and in my relationship with Anna, and gave me tools for self-analysis and self-help. I trusted him as implicitly as I trusted my wife, considering him an integral part of my well-being, a kind of anchor in the stormy sea of my psyche. This feeling of complete harmony and mutual understanding with everyone dear to me made my life truly full, rich, and happy. I was certain that my world was built on a solid foundation, and nothing could destroy it. It was in this idyll, in this seemingly flawless picture, that the first, barely perceptible brushstrokes began to appear, ones that didn't fit the usual landscape. At first, they were trifles, so insignificant that I attributed them to fatigue, stress at work, or simply my own inattentiveness. Anna's phone, which used to lie anywhere on the table, on the sofa, on the windowsill, was now always screened down. It became her new, almost obsessive habit. If she got up to go to another room, the phone invariably went with her, even if it was just a trip to the kitchen for a glass of water or to the bathroom for a couple of minutes. She even took it into the shower with her, leaving it on a shelf, wrapped in a towel. I noticed this, but immediately dismissed the thought that there was anything strange about it. Maybe she had just become more careful, afraid that I might accidentally knock it over, or that it might fall, or that she might get a work call at any moment. My mind, accustomed to trust, obligingly provided the most innocent, most logical explanations, not allowing a single shadow of doubt. It was like an invisible wall that was slowly but surely growing between us, but I refused to see it. Then there was the scent, faint, unfamiliar, slightly musky, with a subtle undertone of something sharp, almost animalistic, that sometimes came from her clothes, especially from the pillow in the mornings. It was foreign. It didn't belong to any of our perfumes, any of our laundry detergents, or any of the familiar scents of our home. It wasn't her scent, not mine, not the smell of our house. It was different. I tried to catch its source, sniffing when she passed by, but it always disappeared as quickly as it appeared, like a mirage, leaving only a slight bewilderment in its wake. I asked Anna if she had changed her perfume or bought a new fabric softener. She answered no, or that it must be the smell of a colleague she sat next to at the office, or a new hand cream she had bought. My brain, programmed to believe, accepted these explanations without a hint of doubt, without a single question. I didn't even wonder why a colleague's scent would stay on her pillow, permeating her hair and skin, or why a new cream smelled so strange and so persistent. Sometimes, in moments when she thought I wasn't looking, a strange, unreadable expression would appear on her face, a mix of detachment, a kind of inner anxiety, and perhaps even a hint of guilt. It lasted only a fraction of a second before her face returned to its usual, open and loving expression, like a mask she wore with flawless precision. Her eyes, which usually shone with warmth, would become cold and distant for a moment, as if she were somewhere far away, lost in her own thoughts, inaccessible to me. I put it down to fatigue, to her inner struggles that she perhaps didn't want to talk about, so as not to burden me with her problems. But these fleeting moments still left a slight discomfort in their wake, like a tiny splinter you can't see, but still feel, reminding you of its presence. She became a little more absent-minded, sometimes forgetting our plans or answering distractedly, as if her thoughts were occupied with something else. Oddities began to appear in my sessions with Sergei Ivanovich, too. At first, they were barely noticeable nuances that I immediately dismissed as products of my imagination. He started asking questions that seemed too personal to me, delving too deeply into my relationship with Anna, even for a psychologist. He was interested in our arguments, our intimate moments, my doubts and fears about our future, our plans, our financial matters. I attributed this to his professionalism, to his desire to get to the root of my problems to help me more effectively. But sometimes, his gaze when I spoke of Anna became strange, too intent, too knowing, as if he already knew the answers to my questions, or, even worse, was a part of those answers. He might ask a question that, it seemed to me, was too specific, too detailed to be just a general question from a psychologist. For example, he might ask, "How does Anna react when you leave your phone charging in the living room and go into the shower?" This seemed odd to me, as I had never mentioned where exactly I left my phone, or that I ever left it unattended, much less shared my feelings about it. He also began to mention Anna more often in our conversations, even when the topic was completely different, as if she were constantly on his mind. Once, when I was telling Sergei Ivanovich about a small conflict with Anna, about how we couldn't agree on a vacation spot, he suddenly smiled. It wasn't the professional, supportive smile I was used to, not one that expressed understanding or sympathy. It was a strange, almost smug smile that disappeared the moment I looked at it. He immediately adopted his usual serious expression, and I once again attributed it to my imagination, to fatigue, to stress. But that moment left a slight residue, as if something invisible but palpable had slipped between us. He became a little more distant. His answers sometimes seemed canned, and his attention was scattered, as if he was lost in his own thoughts, or in thoughts about something else, unrelated to my therapy. I felt enveloped by the sensation that I was inside some kind of play, where everyone around me was acting their part, and I was the only one who didn't know the script, didn't understand the rules of the game. My world was too perfect, too flawless, to let in a shadow of suspicion, to allow myself to doubt its solidity. I was blind because I didn't want to see. My consciousness desperately clung to the familiar picture, unwilling to admit that the first, barely noticeable, but so dangerous cracks had already appeared on its surface. I convinced myself that it was all just a result of my overwork, that I was thinking too much, that I was simply becoming paranoid. I couldn't entertain the thought that the two most important people in my life, the two pillars of my existence, could be connected by something that would destroy everything I had built. The small cracks that appeared in the first chapter of our life together began to widen, turning into deep, alarming fissures that could no longer be ignored. My mind, which had so desperately clung to the familiar, perfect picture of the world, could no longer deny the growing inconsistencies. I didn't consciously seek them out, but they found me on their own, seeping through the shield of my denial like a poisonous gas, slowly but surely poisoning my existence. Anna started staying late at work more often. Her business meetings would stretch late into the evening, and sometimes into the dead of night. Before, she would always call, warn me, and apologize for being late, her voice filled with regret and tenderness. Now, the messages became shorter, and the tone more detached, almost indifferent. Working late. We'll be home late. Lots of work, dry, lifeless phrases devoid of the usual warmth, as if they were written not by my Anna, but by some soulless automaton. When I tried to ask for details, she would answer evasively, citing project confidentiality, fatigue, or a headache. Her eyes would avoid mine, darting to the walls, the floor, anything but my gaze, which, I felt, could burn right through her. One morning, while cleaning her car, I always tried to keep it tidy for her comfort. I found an unfamiliar coffee cup. It wasn't the brand she usually bought on her way to work, not the coffee shop we went to together. It had the logo of a small but very trendy coffee shop in another part of the city, a place she never went to, and which was not on her way to the office at all. A trifle? Maybe. But it snagged on my consciousness like a splinter, like a sharp shard of glass that was impossible to remove. Then I found a movie ticket for a show she hadn't told me about, and its time coincided with one of her late meetings. It was a movie I had wanted to see with her, but she had said she didn't have time, that she was too tired. I didn't ask her about it. I just put it back, trying not to give myself away, not to show that I had noticed anything. A cold, sticky feeling, like a premonition of disaster, began to grow inside me, increasing with each passing day. The scent, that same musky foreign aroma, grew stronger, more pervasive, almost suffocating. It permeated her clothes, even after washing, seemed to linger in the air when she walked by, and settled on our sheets, in her hair, on her skin. It wasn't just a smell. It was a trace, undeniable proof of someone else's presence in our life, in our home, in our bed. My nose, which had previously perceived it as a coincidence, now recognized it as a warning, an alarm that was impossible to ignore. I began to notice how her habits were changing. She started listening to new music, a genre she had never been interested in before, some aggressive rock that she had always despised, or classical music she had never listened to. New words and phrases appeared in her speech that were uncharacteristic of her, some slang she had never used. They sounded as if she had picked them up from someone else, someone she spent a lot of time with, someone who was influencing her, changing her. And Sergei Ivanovich. His behavior also changed, becoming more obsessive, more strange. He started asking questions that seemed to me not just personal, but almost intimate, touching on the most vulnerable aspects of my life and my relationship with Anna. He was interested not only in our arguments, but also in our reconciliations, our intimate moments, my deepest fears and insecurities. His gaze, when I spoke of Anna, became strange, too intent, too knowing, as if he already knew the answers to my questions, or, even worse, was a part of those answers. He might ask a question that, it seemed to me, was too specific, too detailed to be just a general question from a psychologist. For example, he might ask, "How does Anna react when you leave your phone charging in the living room and go into the shower, and what do you feel at that moment?" This seemed strange to me, as I had never mentioned where I left my phone or that I ever left it unattended, much less shared my feelings about it. He also began to mention Anna more often in our conversations, even when the topic was completely different, as if she were constantly on his mind. Once, during a session, when I was talking about my growing anxiety and how I felt Anna was pulling away, Sergei Ivanovich suddenly said, "Sometimes, to find clarity, you need to let go of what seems familiar, even if it hurts. Perhaps your wife is simply looking for her own path, and you should give her some freedom." His words were spoken with such a strange tone, with such cold calmness, that a shiver ran down my spine. This was not like the usual advice of a psychologist. It sounded like a prediction, or even a call to action. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that he was just trying to help me deal with a possible relationship crisis. But inside me, another, much more terrifying premonition had already taken root. My thoughts turned into a whirlpool. Her every action, every word, every glance from Sergei Ivanovich was subjected to a meticulous, agonizing analysis. I tried to find innocent explanations, desperately clinging to any opportunity to justify them, to return to my former peaceful life. Maybe I was going crazy? Maybe my paranoia was destroying something that had been so strong, so unshakable. I fought with myself, with this growing suspicion that threatened to swallow me whole, to turn me into an obsessed madman. I couldn't sleep at night, replaying hundreds of scenarios in my head, each one worse than the last. My body began to react to the stress. Constant headaches, trembling hands, loss of appetite, insomnia. I felt exhausted, drained, but I couldn't stop. The world around me began to seem distorted, as if I were looking at it through a funhouse mirror. I felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by invisible puppeteers. My world was too flawless to allow a shadow of suspicion, to allow myself to doubt its strength. I was blind because I didn't want to see. My consciousness desperately clung to the familiar picture, unwilling to admit that the first, barely noticeable, but so dangerous cracks had already appeared on its surface. I convinced myself that it was all just a result of my overwork, that I was thinking too much, that I was simply becoming paranoid. I couldn't entertain the thought that the two most important people in my life, the two pillars of my existence, could be connected by something that would destroy everything I had built. The tension grew with each passing day, turning into an unbearable burden that weighed on my chest, not letting me breathe. I felt something inside me tighten, anticipating the inevitable, like before a storm. And then, one evening, when Anna was asleep and her phone lay next to her on the bedside table, I couldn't take it anymore. My hand reached for it on its own, as if guided by some unknown force. I knew her password, the date of our first meeting, a date that now seemed like a mockery. My fingers trembled as I entered the numbers. Each click of the key echoed in the silence of the room. My heart pounded in my chest like a trapped bird, ready to break free. I opened the messenger. There were messages, photos that left no room for doubt. This was not just flirting or a slight fling. These were intimate, explicit conversations, photos where she wasn't alone, but with someone else, whose face was hidden, but whose presence was undeniable. And although the other person's name wasn't mentioned directly, the context, the details, the mentions of places I knew, all pointed to someone who was often in our home, who was part of our circle. My world, which I had so carefully built, shattered into a million sharp shards. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a humiliation, a blow to the very heart, to the very soul. I didn't wake her up. I didn't start a scene. I just lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, feeling a cold, bottomless emptiness fill me from within, pushing out all life. I didn't yet know the whole truth, but I already understood that my life would never be the same. I saw a photograph of Anna in the arms of a man whose face was hidden, but on his wrist, I clearly saw a watch. The same watch I had given Sergei Ivanovich for his anniversary, with the engraving, with gratitude from a client. My world had completely collapsed. The morning after my discovery was the hardest of my life, every moment of it seeming like an eternity filled with unbearable pain. I woke up feeling as if I had been run over by a truck and then dragged over sharp rocks. The air in the room felt thick and poisonous, saturated with the smell of lies and betrayal, and Anna's presence next to me was unbearable, suffocating. I couldn't look at her, knowing she was sleeping just inches from me, and her thoughts were, perhaps, of Sergei Ivanovich, or, even worse, of how to hide her double life, how to continue this monstrous deception. My inner monologue turned into a chaotic, insane stream of questions, accusations, and desperate attempts to piece together the fragments of a shattered reality, to glue back together what had been irretrievably destroyed. I felt like a fool, a blind man who hadn't seen the obvious, even though the signs were everywhere, screaming out. A feeling of shame and humiliation filled me to the brim. Shame that I had believed so much, trusted so much, loved so sincerely a person who was capable of such meanness, such cold-blooded hypocrisy. And shame that I had opened my soul to a person who used my deepest vulnerabilities against me. I didn't wake Anna. Confrontation now would be meaningless, perhaps even dangerous. I needed answers, a complete picture of their monstrous conspiracy. I had to understand how deep they had gone, what exactly they were planning. My hand, still trembling, reached for her phone again. I scrolled through the messages, looking not just for confirmation of the affair, but for proof that Sergei Ivanovich was the man and that they were indeed discussing how to get rid of me. Every message, every smiley face, every hint now took on a sinister meaning. I found their shared photos, taken in places where Anna had supposedly gone for work, or where Sergei Ivanovich was holding his conferences. Their words were full of tenderness, future plans, discussions of how they would handle the obstacles. The obstacle, I understood, was me. I remembered that Anna sometimes used her old tablet to watch TV shows in the bedroom, and it might have her password saved for cloud storage or some messengers she didn't use on her main phone. My hands trembled as I turned it on. My heart pounded in my chest, beating a frantic, violent rhythm, drowning out all other sounds. I found what I was looking for. Not just conversations, but entire archives, diaries of their double life, carefully hidden from my eyes. There were not only messages, but also voice memos, videos, even recordings of their joint sessions, where they discussed me, my problems, my fears, my weaknesses that I had so naively revealed to Sergei Ivanovich. They laughed at my naivety, at my belief in their integrity. What I saw surpassed all my worst nightmares, all my darkest premonitions. It wasn't just an affair between Anna and Sergei Ivanovich. It was a full-fledged, meticulously planned, deeply intimate romance between my wife and my psychologist. My best friend, my trusted doctor, the man I had opened my soul to, turned out to be my wife's lover. Photos, videos, intimate confessions, plans for the future. It was all there, irrefutable proof of their relationship, which, it became clear, had been going on not for months, but for years, possibly since the very beginning of my therapy. They lived a double life, right under my nose, using our home as a cover for their meetings, and me as an unsuspecting idiot, a screen behind which they hid. But that was just the beginning of the abyss. What followed were messages that made my blood run cold and my hair stand on end. They were discussing how to get rid of me. Not just to break up, not just to divorce, but to get rid of me. My gaze slid over the lines, and each word pierced my consciousness like a sharp, jagged knife. He's in the way of our plans. He needs to disappear. How can we do it without a fuss? They discussed various scenarios, from financial ruin so that I would be left with nothing, without means of existence, to staging an accident that would look like a tragic mishap. My brain refused to believe what I was reading. These were not just words. This was a carefully crafted, cold-blooded plan, developed by two people I considered my family, my closest people. I found a conversation where Sergei Ivanovich gave Anna advice on how to manipulate me, using information that I myself had told him in our sessions. He's very sensitive to criticism, especially if it comes from you. Use that. His fear of loneliness is your main card. If he starts to suspect, tell him it's his paranoia. You know he's prone to self-doubt. Every word was a blow. Every piece of advice was a slap in the face. My own weaknesses, my vulnerabilities, which I had entrusted to my doctor, had been turned into weapons against me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a perversion of the very essence of trust, the very essence of therapy. I began to feverishly replay all the events of the last few years in my head. Every conversation, every glance, every little thing. Their business trips were actually joint trips to their second, secret home, where they were building their little nest. Their work meetings were dates filled with passion and lies. Their mutual friends, who, as I now understood, knew or at least guessed what was happening, but remained silent, becoming accomplices in this monstrous deception. Their silence was as much a betrayal as their lies. It was tantamount to complicity. I was surrounded by enemies pretending to be friends, and each of them watched my blindness, laughing behind my back, enjoying my ignorance. My inner world collapsed completely, turning into ruins. Words, thoughts, feelings, everything mixed into a chaotic, unbearable vortex that threatened to swallow me whole. I felt my sanity balancing on the edge of madness, ready to fall into the abyss. Hatred, fear, disgust, profound pain, a feeling of absolute helplessness. It all mixed into a single, unbearable lump that was suffocating me. I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I was a target. I was an obstacle that needed to be removed. My existence had become a problem for them that they were willing to solve by any means, even the most brutal and inhuman. I looked at the sleeping Anna, and her face, which had once seemed so familiar and beloved, now looked alien, sinister, concealing a chasm of betrayal and cold-bloodedness. I was in a trap, and I had to get out before it was too late. I found that they were discussing my finances, my investments, my savings. Sergei Ivanovich, knowing about my income and assets from our sessions, was giving Anna advice on how to get access to my accounts, how to transfer money, how to leave me with nothing. They planned to leave me penniless, so that I couldn't fight back, so that I would be completely dependent and helpless. This was not just a desire to get rid of me. It was a desire to destroy me, to erase me from the face of the earth, to take everything I had. My life, my career, my dreams, all of it was just a resource to them that could be used and then discarded. I felt not like a human being, but an object to be disposed of. In one of the messages, Anna wrote, "He's so naive, he believes every word Sergei says. He thinks he's helping him. It's so funny." And Sergei Ivanovich replied, "Yes, he's great material to work with. Always open, always trusting. The perfect victim." These words burned me from the inside, like acid. I had not just been deceived. I had been mocked, humiliated, used. My pain was entertainment for them. My trust, a source of ridicule. I felt myself being dragged into a web of lies woven by the two people closest to me, and I knew that this web wasn't just holding me, it was suffocating me, slowly but surely, depriving me of air, depriving me of everything. The realization that I was a target, that my every move was being tracked, and that my life was hanging by a thread, pierced me with icy terror. But this terror did not paralyze me. On the contrary, it gave me strength. The entire night after I discovered their messages turned into a frantic preparation for escape. I lay next to Anna, pretending to be asleep, my mind working at a furious pace, calculating every step, every risk. Her even breathing, her calm face, which had once been the embodiment of love for me, now seemed like a mask concealing a chasm of cold-bloodedness and betrayal. I felt not just rage building inside me, but a cold, calculating determination to survive. I was in a trap, in my own home, with a person who was planning my destruction, and I had to get out before it was too late. I couldn't wait any longer. Every hour spent in that house was torture. Every glance from Anna or thought of Sergei Ivanovich was a blow. I had to act. My plan was simple: disappear. Not just to leave, but to vanish, without a trace. I began to methodically collect everything I might need for a new life. All the documents I could find, the cash I had at home, credit cards that weren't linked to our joint accounts. I copied all the evidence of their conspiracy messages, photos, voice memos, videos onto several flash drives and uploaded them to cloud storage that only I could access. This was my only weapon, my insurance, my shield. I felt adrenaline pulsating through my veins, sharpening all my senses. Every creak of the floor, every rustle seemed like a signal of my discovery, that they had woken up and were coming for me. I waited for nightfall. When Anna fell asleep, I quietly, like a shadow, crept through the house. I packed a small backpack with the essentials: a change of clothes, a toothbrush, my laptop, and the flash drives. I left a note on the table, short and without explanation, so as not to give them a reason to panic or act immediately. Just, "I've left. Don't look for me." It wasn't a farewell, but rather a warning. I didn't want to give them any reason to think I was going to seek revenge or expose them immediately. My goal was to survive. Leaving the house, I didn't look back. I just walked, wherever my eyes took me, away from this place that had once been my home, my refuge, and had now become a deadly trap, a prison. I changed my phone, throwing the old one into the nearest trash can. I deleted all my social media accounts, severed all ties that could lead them to me. I disappeared. To them, I became a ghost that had vanished into thin air, as if I had never existed. I didn't seek revenge, or think about destroying their lives or having them punished. My only desire was to survive, to escape this abyss that had almost swallowed me whole. Months, and then years, passed. I moved to another city, to the other side of the country, where no one knew me. I changed my name, my profession, my habits. I started a new life, but the old wounds never healed. They continued to bleed, reminding me of themselves every day. I live in a constant state of alertness. Every new person, every unfamiliar face causes a panic attack, makes my heart beat faster. I cannot trust no one. Every glance, every word seems to me part of some new, even more sophisticated conspiracy. I see betrayal in the most innocent gestures, lies in the most sincere smiles. My psyche is forever broken, with a deep, unhealing crack that will never mend. I often think of them, of Anna and Sergei Ivanovich, of their new family, of how they might be living their happy life, built on my ruins. Did they achieve their goal, building their happiness on my suffering? Or did their own conspiracy, their own treachery, eventually turn against them, destroying their own world? I don't know, and I don't want to know. My life now is a constant flight from the ghosts of the past, from the shadow of a threat that may still hang over me, waiting for its hour. I can't shake the feeling that they might find me, that their plan is still in effect. Every call from an unknown number, every strange glance on the street, it all makes me shrink in fear. I survived, but I lost much more than just a wife and a psychologist. I lost my faith in people, in love, in the very possibility of sincere, trusting relationships. My world didn't collapse. It turned into a battlefield where every day I have to fight my own paranoia and fear with the shadows of the past that haunt me. I am left alone with the echo of their betrayal that has taken up residence in my soul forever, becoming an inseparable part of it, and I understand that this echo will haunt me until the very end, until my last breath. This story is about how, just seconds before I was supposed to say, "I do," at our wedding, I caught my fiancée and my own brother in our bed while our children slept peacefully in the next room. And then I discovered they had secretly fathered a child together, hidden from me for years. Our home was always my fortress, a place where the walls absorbed laughter, the air smelled of fresh coffee in the morning and bedtime stories in the evening. Vera, my Vera, was the heart of that home. Her laughter, her gentle touch, her ability to calm every fear. I built my life on these, the foundation of my future. We'd been together for 10 years, and our 2 children, Masha and Andrei, were living proof of our love and hopes. They were the center of our world, and I believed we worked like a perfect machine, protecting their peace and happiness. The pre-wedding rush was enjoyable. Every day was filled with small moments leading us closer to our special day. Choosing flowers, fitting the suit, final touches at the banquet hall. It all created a sense of celebration, anticipation of a new stage in our life. I was completely happy. My career was thriving, the kids were doing well at school. Vera glowed in the preparation of our day. My brother Vadim, too, was part of this idyll. He often dropped by, played with the kids, and helped me with manly chores around the house. I always saw him as a reliable friend and support, someone I could trust. But somewhere, amid that perfect harmony, like a barely visible crack in flawless crystal, odd little anomalies began appearing. They were so trivial that at first I shrugged them off, blaming fatigue or pre-wedding stress. Vera became just slightly more absent-minded than usual. Sometimes she'd answer oddly when I asked about the day's plans, her gaze drifting as if lost in thoughts far from our conversations. I chalked it up to weight on her mind and paid no heed. Once, I remember her hurriedly hiding her phone when I entered the room. She used to leave it anywhere on the table, nightstand fully accessible. I just smiled and teased. "Secrets from your husband, huh?" She replied with a strained smile and changed the subject hastily. At that point, it struck me as playful. Sometimes, when I hugged Vera, she seemed to pull away slightly, not overtly, just a subtle tension I felt in her body. My heart clenched every time, but my mind immediately rationalized. She was tired, had a headache, was just preoccupied. I was so absorbed in our upcoming wedding, so blinded by love and belief in our future, that any warning bells were instantly drowned out by my own confidence. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, she said she urgently needed to visit a friend who was having issues. I offered to drive her, but she refused, saying the friend lived very close and she'd just go for a walk. She returned late, and as I was almost drifting off, I heard her quietly enter the bedroom. She carried a subtle, unfamiliar scent, neither her usual perfume nor the smell of our home. Something fresh, slightly sharp. I asked, "Something happened, dear?" She answered in a sleepy voice that everything was fine and quickly fell asleep. I too drifted off, not realizing that scent was the beginning of the end, a barely noticeable crack becoming a deep fissure poised to consume us. And yet, despite those small inconsistencies, I lived in a state of total bliss. The anticipation of the wedding filled every corner of my soul. I pictured Vera glowing in a white dress, our children beside us in joy. I imagined growing old together, holding hands, remembering this day as the start of our endless story. My trust in Vera was absolute, unwavering so deep it would not allow even a shadow of doubt to seep into my mind. I was happy, I was certain, I was blind. The cracks deepened, though I continued ignoring them, blaming fatigue and wedding preparation. They were no longer barely noticeable. They pulsated, causing a dull ache inside. My inner calm, once unshakable, began to crumble. I started noticing things I had previously overlooked or deliberately ignored. Vera's phone became almost an extension of her. She never put it down. Before it could rest anywhere within reach, she'd snatch it defensively, as if protecting a treasure. A few times I saw her swiping away notifications or closing apps when I glanced over her shoulder. I noticed 2 messaging apps I hadn't seen before. When I asked, she waved it off as work-related for communicating with a new contractor. I accepted that. Trust, a terrifying thing, blinds you. Sense. That unfamiliar aroma I had dismissed once began haunting me. It appeared periodically, like a light but persistent cloud hovering around Vera. I knew every perfume she wore this was different. Fresh, masculine, with a light, woody note. It became more distinct over time, accompanied by an unexplained swelling sense of dread. Her behavior changed, too. Vera became irritable if I stayed late at work or if the kids made noise. She might snap at me, then quickly apologize, blaming fatigue. Her eyes were often red, as though she hadn't slept or had cried. When I asked what was wrong, she said allergies, or that she stayed up binge-watching shows. I wanted to believe. One evening, coming home earlier than usual, I found Vera in the bedroom, sitting on the floor, hugging a pillow and murmuring something. She jumped when she saw me, quickly wiped her eyes. I asked if everything was okay. She shook her head, saying she had a headache, asked to be left alone. That was the moment I felt something inside me break. That secrecy, that tension, those tears, they didn't fit the Vera I knew. But the strangest was Vadim's presence. He visited more often than usual, too often. He'd arrive unexpectedly, pretending to bring something, or just passing by. I enjoyed his attention to family, saw him as a dependable brother. But now his visits gave me a strange, uneasy feeling. They felt too convenient, as though he was part of an invisible schedule. His gaze toward Vera changed. I caught him looking too long, too intently, too intimately. And Vera responded with the same look she used to give only me. It all formed in a logical but terrifying puzzle. I started waking up at night to every creak. I checked Vera's car mileage, fuel level. I knew it was paranoia. I was going crazy from pre-wedding stress, but I couldn't stop. The climax came days before the wedding. She said she'd visit her mother to help with wedding prep. I offered to drive her, but she declined, saying she had to stop at a few places. I went to see a friend near her mom's. To my shock, Vera's car was parked not at her mother's house, but a few blocks from ours in an old abandoned park. My heart pounded. I waited. I saw them. She stepped out of the car. Seconds later, Vadim emerged. They stood together, looking at each other. Then Vadim took and squeezed her hand. It wasn't a friendly farewell. It was intimacy. He leaned and whispered something. She quietly laughed. My Vera. My brother. My mind refused to believe. Cold sweat ran down my back. It wasn't an explosion. It was poison creeping through my veins, paralyzing my ability to breathe. She pulled away when a car passed, got back in. He waved. She drove off. I sat in mine, watching his silhouette dissolve in dusk. In that moment, I didn't know the full truth, but I knew one thing. My life would never be the same. I drove home. The world lost shape. The road blurred. Headlights became blobs. Something inside me died, something living and bright that bound me to Vera and our shared life. When I entered the house, she was already there, calmly sipping tea in the kitchen, as if nothing had happened. That composure was the worst. Her normal warm smile when she turned to me cut sharper than any blade. The pain of her betrayal. The lie, how she could look me in the eyes and pretend. My voice sounded foreign and hoarse when I asked about the trip to her mom. Her answer was mundane, filled with made-up wedding details. In her voice, there wasn't a shade of doubt, not an ounce of guilt. I looked at her and didn't recognize her, a stranger playing her role brilliantly. I walked to the bedroom. When she followed, I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time in all our years, I didn't want to touch her. Every movement, every glance felt soaked in deception. I slept next to her that night, barely sleeping, imagining her and my brother in the car in that abandoned park. Those images replayed like shattered mirror pieces, wounding me from within. The next days were torture. I wandered the house like a ghost, heard every rustle, seeking evidence to finally shatter my hope. I became withdrawn and silent. The children noticed. Their innocent questions about my sadness plunged me deeper into despair. I hugged them, forcing a smile, told them I was just tired. Vera noticed too. Her concerns and attempts to talk irritated me. How could she play me like that? Pretend when everything inside me burned from her deceit. I avoided her touch, excusing with headaches or fatigue. One evening, sitting in the living room, I noticed her tablet, A notification from a messenger I didn't know flashed briefly. It read, "Everything went perfectly. I'm waiting for you. Our little prince missed you so much. Sender name, V." My heart skipped. Our little prince? What did that mean? My mind couldn't piece it together. I grabbed the tablet. When Vera saw me, she lunged, snatching it. My voice, low and animalistic, demanded explanations. She froze, pale. Her attempts to dismiss it as an ad or mistake sounded pathetic. "You're lying!" I almost screamed. "Who is this little prince? And who's V?" Tears filled her eyes. She lowered her head. I demanded explanations, despite her sobs. She begged not to discuss it in front of the children. My gaze fell on their bedroom door. Our kids, sleeping there, were the only reason I still held on. I clenched my teeth. I gave her time but made it clear. Tomorrow all secrets would surface. That night, I didn't sleep again. I lay in another room, listening to our home's silence. That silence was full of unspoken words, hidden secrets, and a pain that felt like it corroded me from within. Our little prince. That phrase pulsed in my head, refusing to let go. Where from? Whose? The thought of a child, their child, was the most monstrous. So absurd, so unbelievable that I tried to push it away. But it returned, relentless as a nightmare. And I knew that tomorrow, when the children went to school, I would get answers. Answers that, as I sensed, would end my life completely. The morning came with oppressive heaviness. Sunlight through the curtains felt like mockery. I got up before anyone. I couldn't bear being near her anymore. The children prepared for school with carefree laughter that was unbearable. I looked at their innocent faces and thought how much their lives would change when the truth came out, how this filth would touch their innocent world. Once they left, the house plunged into deafening silence. Vera sat at the kitchen table, hunched as if expecting a blow. Her rosy cheeks were pale, her eyes swollen. I felt no pity, only anger and emptiness. My voice cold as ice, I demanded to begin with the little prince. She flinched. Her whisper, uttering his name Bodan, was barely audible. Our son. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. Our son. No, that could not be. My mind refused to accept. I demanded the truth. She began crying, tears rolling down, but her story was inevitable. It turned my life to rubble. Their affair had started 7 years ago, almost immediately after our second child Andrei was born. Vadim, who visited often under the guise of helping with repairs, was secretly having a romance with my wife while I was at work. They met in my apartment, in my car, and sometimes in a rental apartment Vadim took supposedly for business meetings. My hysterical, joyless laughter filled the kitchen. 5 years. I lived unaware, raising my children, making future plans while my wife and brother lived a double life and had a child together. Their secret child. All this time, I was a blind idiot, a puppet in their hands. Blood surged in my head, the room swam before my eyes. I wanted to smash everything around, tear her apart, inflict the same pain she had caused me. My voice was terrifyingly calm, while inside raged a hurricane. I demanded to know where the child lived. The answer, with Vadim's mother, was another blow. But his mother knew too. My mother, who always welcomed Vera wholeheartedly. My mother, who adored my children. The sense of betrayal became all-encompassing. The entire world I lived in turned out to be a monstrous lie. She continued, sobbing and apologizing, trying to explain how they got tangled up, how they never meant to hurt me. Her words were empty sound. I didn't hear. My mind collected those tiny scraps of information, all the oddities I dismissed as fatigue or stress. Her friend visits, her distraction, strange scents, red eyes, all now formed a horrifying meaning. And Vadim, my brother, the person I loved and trusted above everyone. He regularly came to my home, played with my children, ate at my table knowing I was sleeping with his lover, the mother of his child, my wife. My whisper, full of boundless exhaustion, asked one question. How could you, Vera? She tried to approach, but I recoiled. Her touch disgusted me. Her pleas to explain were futile. To me, she was a liar, a traitor, the mother of my brother's child. At that moment, I heard the front door open. My heart dropped. The children, they'd come back early. I realized we couldn't continue this conversation now, not in front of them. My words were clear and cold. Tonight, they both, she and Vadim, must be here. They will explain everything. Together. She nodded, pale as death. I left the kitchen, leaving her alone with her tears and lies. I remained one-on-one with the abyss that opened beneath me. Our wedding was supposed to be tomorrow. I was supposed to become the happiest man alive. Instead, I found myself at the edge of an abyss, staring into a black void. The evening was suffocating, heavy like the air was soaked with sticky foreboding. Every heartbeat resonated like hammer strikes. I sat in the living room, waiting. The suit I was meant to wear tomorrow hung in the closet, a mute reproach. In the next room, our children slept. My children, not theirs. That thought cut like a razor. A knock at the door. I didn't move. Vera answered. I heard muffled whispers, then footsteps. They entered. Vadim looked pale, eyes darting. Vera held his hand, like a drowning woman, clings to a lifeline. He wouldn't look at me, my own brother. Sit. My voice was dry, lifeless. They sat on the opposite couch. A dense, ringing silence hung between us. I didn't need more words or excuses. It was all said this morning. I just stared at them, this pair that had torn my life apart from within. So, I began, with a voice that seemed not my own. I want to know everything. Every last detail. Every move. Every deception. Every lie. The name of every meeting. Every hidden smile. Everything. Vadim finally looked up. In his eyes were fear, shame, and a strange resignation. Vera sobbed. They spoke, interrupting each other, stumbling over statements, trying to soften things. I listened. Each word was a new knife, piercing deeper. Their secret apartment, rented by Vadim, under the guise of meeting clients where they spent nights. Bodan's birthdays celebrated as a trio, while I bought presents for my children. Mutual friends who apparently knew or suspected, but kept silent, preferring to witness my humiliation. My world had been threaded by their lies. I was the last to know. The worst wasn't even the betrayal itself. Worse was realizing how foreign I had been in their world, how carefully they built a parallel reality, pulling me away from it. They played roles every day, every hour, while I believed in their sincerity. It was disgusting. When they finished, silence fell. I stood. There will be no wedding tomorrow, I said calmly. You, Vera, pack your things. Today, you leave. You only see the children with my permission, and only in my presence. You get 0 chances. Vera jumped up. Andrei, no, please. The kids, they love me, she cried. They love the mother who lied to them all their lives, I replied, voice cracking. the mother who destroyed her family for her filthy secret. Then I turned to Vadim. You, get out of my life, out of my children's lives. I never want to see you again. If you come near my family, I will make you regret it. He stayed silent, head down, a pathetic, cowardly figure. Vera tried begging, clutching my hands. I pulled away as from something filthy. Her tears, her pleas, now just another performance. She packed a few bags quickly, nervously. The kids slept. She couldn't say goodbye to them, that was my decision. Cruel? Maybe. But she left me no choice. When she walked out with Vadim, I felt no relief, only emptiness. A huge, gaping void in my chest. Morning came. The morning that was supposed to be the happiest of my life, but it marked the beginning of something new. Something terrible and irreversible. My life, as I knew it, ended. The shards of tomorrow scattered to the wind. I remained alone in our empty home, with 2 sleeping children and a pain that I knew would remain with me forever. I didn't seek vengeance or destroy their lives. Their betrayal already wrecked mine. Now I had to learn how to live among those fragments, rebuilding myself piece by piece, for the children, for myself, and I knew it would be a long and agonizing journey. This is a story about how my world, built on love and trust, collapsed when I found out that my wife was cheating on me with my best friend, the godfather of our son. And then, they both filed for custody. This is a story about how I lost everything. Not overnight, no. My downfall was like a slow, drawn-out fall where you haven't hit the ground yet, but you already know there's no saving yourself. It started with small things, the kind that seem insignificant in a happy life. You know how they say happiness is made up of little things? Well, so is its destruction. My life with Lilia was like a perfectly built house. A solid foundation, walls filled with laughter and conversations, and a roof that protected us from all hardship. We spent 10 years together, and in all that time, I never once doubted her love. My wife, delicate, yet strong, with radiant eyes and a smile that could melt an iceberg. I loved her with the same strength as on the very first day, and our son, Daniil, was the embodiment of that love. I was happy. I was truly happy. My best friend, Mark, was an integral part of our world. We had known each other since school, and he was more than a friend to me. He was like a brother. I trusted him like I trusted myself, maybe even more. Naturally, we chose him to be Daniil's godfather. We spent a lot of time together, weekends, holidays, or just casual evenings. Lilia got along with Mark perfectly, and I was always glad about their friendship. It seemed like the perfect picture, a loving family and a loyal friend always by your side. The first crack appeared so subtly that I didn't even notice it at first. Lilia started staying late at work. At first, half an hour, then an hour. She said they had urgent deadlines, a new project, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was a responsible person. I was supportive of her commitment to her job. She always came home tired but glowing, and I chalked it up to the thrill of professional success. But then her phone became a vault of secrets. We used to share our phones easily to browse something online or make a call. But now it was always with her, face down, and she'd quickly lock it if I happened to be near. I noticed her smiling at messages, only to change her expression instantly when she saw me looking. Something twisted inside me, but I brushed it off. What nonsense, I thought. Lilia would never. She became more distant. She'd sit at the table, staring into space, not even hearing me speak. When I asked what was wrong, she'd wave me off. Nothing, just tired. Her touch became colder, her hugs shorter. I blamed it on accumulated stress. I tried to be more caring, cooked dinner, brought her coffee in bed, gave her massages, but she seemed far away. Her body was there, but her soul was no longer with me. One evening, while she was showering, a message popped up on her phone. The screen lit up for a second, and I saw it was from Mark. Something like, "Tonight was amazing, miss you." My heart skipped a beat. Why would Mark be sending messages like that to my wife? I pushed the thought away. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me? Or work-related? I told myself it was nothing. They were just friends. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A cold, creeping doubt that slowly began to erode the foundations of my perfect world. I didn't know then that it was just the beginning. That tiny crack was merely a foreshadowing of the earthquake that was about to destroy everything I held dear. That seed of doubt grew fast. I tried to ignore it, reason it away, but it was too persistent. It whispered in my ear, forcing me to notice details I'd previously overlooked. My life turned into surveillance. My home became a theater, and I was the actor, the audience, and the detective all at once. I was ashamed. I'd never been the jealous type, never snooped, never eavesdropped. But I couldn't stop. I searched. I waited. I feared. It started with scents. Lilia had always worn the same perfume light, floral, soft. It was her scent. But lately, I started noticing another smell on her clothes, a man's cologne. Faint, but distinct. At first, I assumed it came from male coworkers, but I kept noticing it, stronger each time. Like a mark left by someone else, and the scent, it was familiar. I just couldn't place it. I started noticing things I'd previously ignored. She had new jewelry, a thin gold bracelet, small earrings. When I asked, she said she bought them as a reward for finishing a big project. I believed her, but something didn't add up. Lilia was never one for expensive gifts for herself. She was always practical and frugal. Even our intimacy changed. It became rare. I blamed her exhaustion from work. But now, when I looked back at her eyes, I realized it wasn't fatigue. It was emptiness. She was somewhere else, not with me. I had become a ghost in my own marriage. Our touches became mechanical, our kisses short and lifeless. I felt betrayed even when she was physically present. And Mark, my best friend, he changed too. He became distant, avoided eye contact. Our conversations were shorter, duller, no jokes, no stories. When we were all together, I caught their glances quick, guilty, terrified. They tried to hide it, but I saw. I saw how they spoke in half sentences. Only they understood. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. In the kitchen, I saw Lilia quickly hiding something in a drawer. I asked what she was doing. She looked startled and said she was just putting away dishes. But her face betrayed guilt. I opened the drawer and found a small, gift-wrapped box. Lilia snatched it from me. "It's a surprise," she said. "You love surprises, don't you?" Her voice trembled. I felt she was lying. When she went to the bathroom, I opened the box. Inside was a fancy pen I'd long wanted, but could never afford. And a note. "Happy anniversary, my love. Lilia." My heart sank. Something was wrong. Our anniversary was a week away, and I remember just last week, Mark had bragged about buying that same pen for himself. Coincidence? Maybe. But my doubt was no longer a worm. It was a serpent, coiling tightly around my heart. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to know the truth, whatever it was. The next day, I stayed home, pretending I was sick. Lilia left for work with her usual rushed indifference. She didn't even sound worried. That stung. My plan was simple. I knew where she worked. I drove there and waited. I felt like a fool, but I couldn't stop. After 2 hours, I began doubting myself. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I imagined it all. But then, I saw her. She came out of the building glowing with happiness, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was with someone, and it was Mark. They were walking together, holding hands, laughing, talking. Their closeness left no doubt they weren't just friends. The way they looked at each other, that was love. My world collapsed. I felt the air leave my lungs. I sat there, frozen, watching them, those two traitors, and I felt nothing, just emptiness. Then they stopped, and Mark kissed her. Not a quick kiss on the cheek, a deep, passionate kiss. Lilia embraced him, pressing her body to his, her eyes closed in pleasure. I wanted to scream, to smash my head on the steering wheel, but I just sat and watched as my wife and my best friend betrayed me right before my eyes. Everything came together. The smells, the gifts, the looks, the secrets. It wasn't overtime. It wasn't stress. It was a second life, a life I wasn't part of. That night, I waited for them. I didn't know what I would say or do. I was full of rage and pain. I waited, just to look them in the eyes. But when they came in, they were calm. As if nothing had happened, Lilia asked how I was feeling. Mark started telling me about his day. I looked at them at their carefree faces, and I wanted to kill them. I stayed silent, just stared. Lilia noticed something in my face. The pain, the fury. "Is something wrong?" she asked. I looked at her, then at Mark, then back. "Today," I said, "I saw you." Her face went pale. Mark looked away. That was all I needed. Silence. Deafening silence. Louder than any scream. Proof of their betrayal. Then I asked, "How long?" She didn't answer. I repeated, "How long has this been going on, Lilia? When did you find the time? And you, Mark, my friend, my son's godfather, you lied to my face." Mark finally spoke, his voice shaky. "We didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to?" I laughed bitterly. "But you did it anyway. You thought I was a fool. I believed your stories, your excuses. You took advantage of my trust." Lilia began to cry, not out of guilt, but because she got caught. "We love each other," she said. Those words hit me harder than anything else. I looked at her, the woman I once loved, and realized everything I believed about her was a lie. Everything we built was a fragile house of cards they tore down without a second thought. "You love each other," I laughed again. "What about me? What about our son? Did you think about him when you were sneaking around?" They stayed silent, and that silence condemned them more than any words could. I left the room. I didn't want to hear apologies or fake regrets. I drove aimlessly through the night. My thoughts were broken glass, impossible to piece together. I remembered fishing with Mark, sharing secrets, him holding my newborn son, and Lilia laughing beside him. All of it a lie. The next day, when I returned, they were gone. Lilia had packed up and left. She left a short note. "I'm sorry. We can't live like this anymore. We're filing for divorce." And at the bottom, a line that stabbed me straight in the heart. "We're going to fight for custody of Daniel. He deserves a family where there's real love." Signed, Lilia and Mark. He deserves a family where there's real love. Those words burned. The hatred boiled inside me again, not hot, but cold and focused. They didn't just betray me, they wanted to take my son, my only true love, claiming they knew what real love was. Their love built on lies, betrayal, and humiliation. But I wasn't going to give up. I pulled myself together. No more tears, no more self-pity. I had to fight. I had to become the father Daniel needed. I called a lawyer. He listened. I saw sympathy in his eyes. He warned me it wouldn't be easy. They'd try to paint me as unstable, as an unfit father. But I was ready. I was prepared to fight for every lie they told. Every night I waited, every betrayal. The trial was brutal. Lilia and Mark sat across from me like I was the villain. Their lawyer called me emotionally unstable. Mark sat holding Lilia's hand, the godfather of my child. They tried to justify their betrayal as something good. At times, I doubted myself, wondered if I'd lost my mind. But then I looked at them. No remorse, just cold resolve. In the final hearing, I spoke. Calmly, directly. I told the court about love, not betrayal. Love. The love I had for my wife, for my son. I told the truth that Mark had been my best friend, Lilia, my wife, and Daniil, our dream. I spoke not as a victim, but as a father. When I finished, the room was silent. Lilia cried. Mark looked away. But they weren't crying for me, they were crying because their plan had failed. The court ruled in my favor. I got custody of Daniil. I saw their faces pale, stunned. Lilia glared with hatred. Mark looked terrified. They had lost. Not just Daniil, but their true love, exposed for what it was. Selfishness and stolen happiness. I walked out of that courtroom, not as a man broken, but as a man who had survived. I had saved my son. But this wasn't a happy ending. I was left alone, with a deep fracture in my soul. No wife, no best friend, only a child, my child. I don't know what comes next, but I know one thing. I will never forgive them. I'll never forget. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of how you can lose everything and still find the strength to fight for what truly matters. This is a story of how one morning, standing in my bedroom in my wedding suit, I discovered that the world I had built for years was nothing but a fragile illusion, and at its center was always a stranger's secret life, hidden from me by the person closest to me and my best friend. The only thing I remember is the breathing. Slow, steady. Your breathing, Charlotte, as you slept beside me, and I lay still, not daring to move, so as not to break that fragile silence. Silence was our sanctuary. It said more than words ever could. It spoke of trust, of peace, of finding everything we had been looking for in each other. All my life, I had searched for this peace. And here it was, in our bedroom, in this house we had built together, brick by brick, just like our lives. It had always been just you and Noah, 3 unbreakable pillars, me, you, and my best friend. Our childhoods, our youth, our adulthoods, all intertwined in our stories. Noah was more than a friend. He was a part of me, a part of our family. He was our witness. He was the one who was always there, in joy and sorrow, the first to rush over when I, trembling with nerves, was choosing an engagement ring for you. His approving nod meant more to me than the opinion of the entire world. Because Noah was Noah. The wedding was tomorrow. I watched you sleeping, and my heart was squeezed by such a piercing, almost painful tenderness. You were perfection, Charlotte. The ideal line of your brows, your soft, slightly disheveled hair, your lips slightly parted in sleep. You were my future, my present, my everything. I thought about how I would look at you tomorrow, as you walked toward the altar, how I would catch your gaze, full of love and promises. It seemed to me that there was nothing that could cloud this day. Today was the last day of our pre-wedding life. The house was filled with a flurry of activity, the smells of food being cooked, the laughter of family and friends. Noah, of course, was here. He was helping me with the final preparations. We moved furniture, hung garlands, joked, and reminisced about the past. At one point, he caught my eye, and I saw something strange in his gaze, something I had never noticed before. It was like a shadow, a fleeting flicker of guilt, but it disappeared instantly, and he was once again the same Noah, ever smiling and carefree. I chalked it up to my own anxiety, the pre-wedding jitters. It felt as if I was looking for trouble where there could be none. Noah leaned against the wall, watching me intently. He smiled. "Are you ready, old man?" he asked. I nodded. More than ready. He looked at me with a strange expression, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't bring himself to. Then he just shrugged and went back to what he was doing. I didn't pay it any mind. I thought I was just too excited, and my imagination was running wild. I knew him too well to have any doubts. That evening, after everyone had left, it was just the two of us, Charlotte and me. We sat in the living room, bathed in the soft light of a single-floor lamp. You rested your head on my shoulder, and I held you, inhaling the familiar scent of your hair. "I'm so happy," you whispered, and your voice sounded as if you were saying it for the first time in your life. I held you tighter. "Me too, my love." But in that moment, when I thought we were a single entity, I noticed something. Your gaze. It was directed somewhere to the side, toward our bedroom. There was something elusive in that look, something I had never seen before. And again, just like with Noah, it was like a shadow, a fleeting flicker of longing or regret, and it vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. I again attributed it to my own imagination, to the exhaustion of the wedding preparations. I remembered how, a few weeks ago, while we were choosing furniture, you had insisted on buying 2 identical nightstands. I had suggested we only get one. You had looked at me strangely and said that you needed 2. You said it was for symmetry, for balance. I had laughed at the time, but now, remembering your gaze in the living room, I felt something strange, a sense of distrust. I didn't understand what it was. We had always been open with each other. We had never had secrets. I wanted to believe it was just pre-wedding stress. But I couldn't forget that look. It was like a tiny splinter. I tried to convince myself that it was just nerves, that everything was perfect, and Charlotte was perfect, and Noah was perfect, and our love was perfect, and everything would be all right. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Because if it wasn't true, then the world I had built my entire life would not be as solid as I had thought. I couldn't fall asleep. Your breathing was still steady, but my heart was pounding as if it wanted to burst from my chest. I thought about you, about Noah, about us, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why I was feeling this. I didn't understand what was happening, and I felt that something was about to happen, something that would change my life forever. The morning didn't arrive as I had imagined. I had expected light flooding the room, birds singing at dawn, and an overwhelming sense of anticipation. Instead, I woke up to a strange silence. I lay still, trying to catch a sound, but there was none. The room, so full of noise just yesterday, now felt empty, alien. And I felt empty too, as if something was being sucked out of me from the inside. It was unsettling and cold. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was your silhouette, Charlotte. You were standing by the window, motionless, looking out at the street. You couldn't be called happy, On the contrary, you seemed lost. I wanted to go to you, to hold you, but something stopped me. Something I couldn't define. I felt that something had appeared between us, something invisible yet dense, like a wall. I was afraid that if I took a single step, this wall would become visible and unbreakable. I was silent, and you were silent. You continued to stare out the window. I waited for you to turn around, to smile, to say something, but it didn't happen. You just stood there, motionless, like a statue. I realized you were in another world, a world I had no access to, and that frightened me. I had never seen you like this. You had always been an open book. I knew everything about you. Or so I thought. I got up, went to you, and put my hand on your shoulder. You flinched, as if waking from a deep sleep. You looked at me, and in your eyes, I saw fear. It was there, that fear. Real, animal, and it was directed at me. Or so I thought. Is everything okay? I asked, trying to stay calm. You nodded, turned away, and went into the bathroom. I'm just a little nervous. Your voice sounded muffled, as if you were speaking from a deep well. You closed the door, and I was left alone, in our bedroom, in this house we had built together. I stood and stared at the bathroom door, and it felt like it would never open. I felt you were hiding behind it, hiding from me. And that was the worst part. It was worse than fear. It was betrayal, but I didn't want to believe it. I started to get dressed. The suit fit perfectly, but I felt like a stranger in it, as if it wasn't my clothing. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize my own reflection. There was a stranger in it, with a stranger's eyes, with a stranger's fear. My hands trembled as I fastened the buttons. I felt that every button, every stitch, every seam was just a decoration that was about to collapse. I wanted to tear the suit off, rip it to shreds, to scream, but I couldn't. I had to smile. I had to be happy. I had to be the groom. Noah came earlier than everyone else. He entered, smiling broadly, and shouted, "Where's my best friend, the groom? Is he ready for the greatest day of his life?" I smiled, or so it seemed. I felt the smile didn't reach my eyes, that it was frozen on my face like a mask. I looked at Noah, and he seemed to notice nothing. He was just as he always was. Cheerful, energetic, carefree. He told some funny stories, he joked, but I wasn't listening. I was watching. I was watching his every move, his every word, and I was trying to find a single crack, a single inconsistency that could explain my feelings. But there were none. He was the perfect friend. And then I noticed something strange. Noah was sitting on the couch, and his gaze was fixed on our bedroom. The door was ajar. His eyes were empty. He was staring into space, and there was a shadow on his face, the very same shadow I had seen yesterday. It was here, and it was real. Noah caught my eye, and his eyes immediately came alive. He jumped up, came over to me, and hugged me. "Are you nervous, old man?" he asked. I nodded. "Everything will be fine," he said. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. We sat in the living room, waiting for the guests, and I kept thinking. I tried to find logic in what was happening, but there was none. And then I remembered the 2 nightstands. You had so insisted on buying 2. I had laughed at you, but now I was not laughing. I got up and went to the bedroom. I went to your nightstand and opened it. There were some small things in it. And then I opened my nightstand. It was empty, and I didn't understand why. Why hadn't I noticed this before? Why was I so blind? I went to the walk-in closet. It was huge, and we had built it together so there would be enough space for our things. I took my suit, which was hanging in the center, and started to get dressed. I fastened the buttons, tied the tie, but my hands were trembling. I felt like I was about to lose my mind. I was searching for anything that could explain my feelings. And I found it. I looked into your side of the closet. Everything was perfect, as always. All your dresses, your shoes, your jewelry, everything was hanging in order. And then I saw it. A small, neat leather case. I didn't remember what it was. I opened it, and my heart stopped. Inside lay 2 silver cufflinks with an engraving. I had given them to Noah for his birthday last year. I had bought them in an antique shop in Paris when you and I were there. I had searched for them for so long because they were unique. And now they were in your closet, Charlotte. Not in your nightstand, but in your closet, tucked away, hidden from me. I took them in my hands. They were cold as ice. I held them in my hands, and it felt like I was holding the evidence of my defeat, the proof that my world was shattered, that I had been deceived, that I was a fool. I didn't understand what this meant. I didn't understand why they were here, why you had them, why they weren't with Noah. I didn't understand anything. I heard footsteps. Your footsteps, Charlotte. I closed the case, put it back, and went to the living room. You were standing there in your wedding dress. It was white as snow, and I was black, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why I was feeling this. I didn't understand what was happening, and I felt that something was about to happen, something that would change my life forever. It was like looking at the world through cracked glass. Everything that had seemed whole and beautiful just a few minutes ago was now distorted, shattered into sharp, cutting shards. Noah's cufflinks in your closet, Charlotte. 2 small, silver, cold pieces of metal that I had given to him. I held them in my hands, and it felt like I was holding my own heart, torn in 2. I didn't understand how this was possible. How could you, Charlotte? How could you both? I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The suit I had so carefully chosen now seemed like a clown's uniform. I was a laughingstock, a man who knew nothing. A man who had been betrayed in his own home, at his own wedding. I felt shame wash over me. Shame for my blindness, for my naivety. I wanted to scream, to punch the walls, but I couldn't. I had to smile. I had to be the groom. You entered the room, in your wedding dress, white as snow. You looked at a man who thought you were his universe, and you looked at me with your false smile, with your empty eyes. You came to me, straightened my tie, touched my cheek, and I felt disgust overwhelm me. I wanted to pull away, but I couldn't. "Are you ready?" you asked. I nodded. "I'm so happy," you said. I knew it was a lie. I knew you were lying, and I didn't understand why. Why all this game? Why this spectacle? The wedding was perfect, or so it seemed to me. Everyone was smiling, congratulating, laughing, but I didn't see it. I only saw masks. Masks on their faces, masks on their hearts. I looked at our friends, at our family, and it seemed to me that they all knew about our disgrace, about our betrayal. I caught their glances, and it seemed to me there was pity in them. Pity for a fool. Pity for me. We stood at the altar. I looked at you, Charlotte, and it felt like I was looking at a stranger. You were so beautiful, so perfect in that white dress. But I knew that behind this beauty lay a lie. I heard the priest's vows. I heard our vows. And it felt like I was hearing laughter. Laughter that echoed in my head. Laughter that told me it was all a farce. Noah stood nearby. My best friend. He was smiling. He was so proud of us. He looked at us, and I saw something in his eyes. Something I couldn't understand. It was like triumph. A victory. And it frightened me. I wanted to go to him, to hit him, to scream, but I couldn't. I had to smile. I had to be happy. And then came the toast. Noah's toast. He stood up, raised his glass, and began to speak. He spoke of our love, our loyalty, our friendship. He said that we were the perfect couple. He said that he had always known we would be together. He said that our love was something he had never seen before. And as he said this, he looked at you, Charlotte. Not at me, but at you. And there was something in his gaze that I couldn't understand. Something I didn't want to understand. It was something intimate. Something that should have only been between us. But it was between you. In that moment, I understood. I understood that they all knew. All our friends, all our family. They all saw the way he looked at you. They all saw the way you looked at him. And they were all silent. They were all accomplices in this crime. They were all a part of this lie. And I felt alone. Alone like never before. I stood there, in the center of this celebration, in the center of this merriment, and I felt as if I were the only one in the entire world. And then there was the dance, our first dance. You rested your head on my shoulder, and I held you. I held you in my arms, and it felt like I was holding a doll pretending to be you. I looked into your eyes, and I saw nothing in them. Emptiness, a lie, and betrayal. Noah stood to the side, watching us and smiling. His eyes were glowing, and I understood that he was the one looking at you. He was the one who knew you. He was the one who loved you. And I was just a mask you wore to hide your lie. I felt anger fill me, anger that I couldn't control. I wanted to tear off this mask, to rip it from you, but I couldn't. I had to smile. I had to be happy. I had to be the groom. Anger. It was the only thing I felt. It was hot, burning, like lava. It was burning me from the inside, and I felt myself turning to ashes. I looked at you, Charlotte, in that white dress, and I only saw lies. Lies you had so carefully hidden. Lies you had so carefully built. And I was a part of that lie. I was a fool. I was a laughingstock, and I couldn't take it anymore. We danced, and I felt your hand on my back. I felt your breath on my neck, and I felt myself starting to go crazy. I wanted to push you away, to scream, but I couldn't. I had to be the groom. I had to smile, and I smiled. But it wasn't my smile. It was the smile of a man who had died. I saw Noah. He was standing in the crowd watching us, and his smile was the same as mine. The smile of a man who had died. But I knew it wasn't true. He was alive. He was the winner. He was the one who had destroyed my life. I wanted to go to him, grab him by the collar, and scream, but I couldn't. I had to smile. The dance ended, and I let you go. You smiled, and I saw your eyes flash. It wasn't love. It was triumph. I saw it. It was there, in your eyes, in your smile. And that was the worst part. I went to our bedroom. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to find answers, but there were no answers. There was only silence. The silence that had been our sanctuary had now become our graveyard. I sat on the bed, our bed. I looked at everything in that room, at every single thing we had bought together, at every photograph, in every one of which we were smiling, at everything that had been a part of our life, and I realized that it was all a lie. It was all a set of decorations. It was all dust. I saw a small journal on the nightstand, which now felt like it was yours alone. You always wrote your thoughts, your dreams, your plans in it. You always told me it was your world. And I had never dared to look inside. I respected your space. I respected you, but now I couldn't. I had to. I had to find answers. I had to know what you were hiding. I opened it. I started to read. And every word, every line, every page, it was all like a knife being plunged into my heart. They weren't thoughts. They weren't dreams. It was a diary, the diary of our lie, the diary of your love. I read about how you met in secret, about how you planned our future. I read about your feelings for Noah, about your love, about your passion. I read that you didn't love me, that you married me because you were supposed to, because your parents wanted you to, because I wanted you to. I read that Noah was the father of your child. I didn't understand what this was. I was reading and didn't understand. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought it was some evil, terrible dream that I couldn't wake up from. But it wasn't. It was real. Everything was real. I got to the last entry. It was from this morning. This morning. You had written that you couldn't do it anymore, that you loved Noah, that you wanted to be with him, that you wanted to tell me the whole truth, and that you were afraid. You wrote that you didn't know how to do it, that you didn't know how to tell me you were pregnant with Noah's child. I closed the journal. My hands were shaking. My heart had stopped. I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, just emptiness. I was empty. I was dead. I walked out of the bedroom. You were standing in the living room, talking to our friends. You were smiling, laughing, and I looked at you, and I didn't recognize you. You were a stranger. A stranger I had loved so much. I walked up to Noah. He was standing nearby. He smiled. "You look pale," he said. I looked at him, and I didn't see a friend in him. I saw a traitor. I saw a man who had destroyed my life. "You look happy," I said. He smiled. "I'm so happy for you both," he said. I felt rage overwhelm me. Rage that was stronger than me. I grabbed him by the collar. "You're a liar," I said. He looked at me, and his smile disappeared. He was scared. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "About your cufflinks," I said. "About your child." Wedding day. I stood in our bedroom, in a wedding suit, in a white wedding dress, and I looked at you, Charlotte, at you, Noah, at the two people who had destroyed my life. I held the journal in my hands. I held the proof that I was a fool, the proof that I was blind, the proof that I had been deceived. And I looked at you, and I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no rage, just emptiness. I was empty. I was dead. I slowly walked over to you, Charlotte. You looked at me, and in your eyes, I saw fear. The fear you had so carefully hidden. The fear that was written on your face, on your hands, on your body. You were terrified. And I realized that was all I had left. I put the journal on the nightstand. I didn't say a word. I just looked at you, and you looked at me, and in that moment, I understood that we were strangers. We had never been close. We had never been a family. We were two strangers who were playing a game, and I had lost. I slowly walked to the door. I turned the handle. I opened it. I walked out. I left you two alone. I left you in this house. In this house we had built together, brick by brick. In this house that had been our sanctuary and was now your graveyard. I walked down the street. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. I just walked, and I felt a coldness wash over me. A coldness that was inside me, that was outside me, that was everywhere. I was alone. I was lonely like never before. I sat on a bench. I looked at the sky. It was blue, as always. The sun was shining, as always. The birds were singing, as always. And I thought that nothing had changed. Everything was as it had always been. But that wasn't true. My world had collapsed. My life was over. And I didn't know what to do. I remembered you saying you were happy. I remembered you smiling. I remembered you looking at me. And I realized that it was a lie. Everything was a lie. Our love, our friendship, our life, it was all a lie. I got up. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. And I knew that I would never return. I would never return to that house. I would never return to you. I would never return to Noah. I would never return to myself. I left. I left everything. I left my life, my love, my family. I left everything that had been a part of me, and I realized that I was dead. I was dead from the very beginning. I was dead when you lied to me. I was dead when you cheated on me. I was dead when you married me. I walked down the street, and I felt emptiness fill me. Emptiness that was inside me, that was outside me, that was everywhere. I was empty. I was dead. And I didn't know what to do. I am no longer a hero. I am no longer a husband. I am no longer a friend. I am nothing. I am ash and emptiness. This is a story about how my younger brother, Stephen, stopped being a brother to me, and how my wife, Emily, turned out to be someone completely different from who I thought she was. This is a story about how our youngest son, Jacob, whom I loved with all my heart, turned out to be a stranger. I always believed I had everything. Emily, my Emily, her smile, her warmth, her laugh, that I would have recognized out of 1,000. 10 years of marriage, 2 wonderful sons, the older one, Noah, as sensible and calm as me, and the younger one, Jacob, a mischievous, cheerful, and open child with a restless energy so much like my brother Stephen's. We lived in our house in the suburbs, so cozy and quiet, with a large garden where I loved to spend my evenings, pruning rose bushes and thinking about how lucky I was. Our life was like a well-oiled machine, where every part fit perfectly with the others. In the morning, Emily would make breakfast. Then we would all sit down at the table together. I would drive the children to school, then head to my office. While Emily went about her day, she had a small but successful art studio where she gave painting lessons. We would meet in the evening, share our news, and have dinner together. Every Saturday, we would all have lunch at my parents' house, and on Sundays, we would go for walks in the park. Stephen, my younger brother, was a frequent guest in our home. He lived alone and was always a bit carefree but kind. He adored the children, and they adored him. Stephen was like a big kid himself, and I, as the older brother, had always been a little protective of him, always trying to help. When he came over, our house would fill with even more laughter and noise. Emily seemed to love Stephen too. They got along easily and joked a lot. I was always happy that they had such a good relationship. It felt so sweet, so right. It was into this perfect picture that the first, barely perceptible crack began to creep. It was something so insignificant that I didn't even notice it right away. I was sitting in the garden, pruning the roses, when Emily came out onto the porch. She was on the phone, but something in her voice made me flinch. It was different, tender, quiet, intimate. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt the change in her intonation, the way she smiled with her lips, the way her eyes shone. She never spoke to me like that on the phone. Maybe it was a friend? I didn't give it much thought. A couple of days later, I felt it again. We were having dinner, and Emily suddenly fell silent, staring out the window. She seemed to be a million miles away. I tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond immediately. When she turned, her eyes were a little foggy. She said she was just lost in thought and smiled her usual smile. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, but something inside me tightened. It was as if a barely noticeable, but now present, scratch had appeared on a perfect mirror. One evening, I came home early, wanting to surprise Emily. Stephen's car was in our driveway. I smiled. I opened the door with my key and heard laughter. Their laughter, loud and cheerful. I walked into the living room and froze. Emily and Stephen were sitting on the couch. He was showing her something on his phone, and they were laughing. But it wasn't the laughter that mattered. Emily was sitting too close, too casually. And his hand was resting on her knee, and she didn't move it. I cleared my throat. They both jumped and recoiled from each other, as if they had been burned. It was in that moment that I first saw something in Emily's eyes that I couldn't decipher. Fear. Guilt? I don't know. David, you're home early. Emily jumped up and fixed her hair. Stephen just stopped by for a second to drop something off for me. Yeah, Stephen said, not looking at me. Just dropped in. I felt a cold wave wash over my body. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't right. I couldn't explain to myself what it was, but there was something fake about their behavior, a hidden tension. It was a fleeting moment, but it was seared into my memory. I tried not to think about it, but the image of them on the couch, their laughter, their sudden reaction, it all kept replaying in my mind. I started noticing that Stephen was visiting more often when I wasn't home. I started noticing how Emily would smile awkwardly when I mentioned his name. The crack in the mirror was getting wider, and I couldn't stop staring at it. The second crack appeared when I found their little secret. Not a terrible one, no, just a small, insignificant one, or so I thought at the time. It was a normal Tuesday. I came home from work earlier than usual and saw Emily hiding something in a closet. She gave me an awkward smile and said it was a gift for me. I didn't press her, but her behavior seemed strange. Later, I noticed she started spending more time in her studio, but wasn't painting. She would just sit and stare out the window. Doubts began to creep up on me like shadows when the light fades. One day, when Emily was busy in her studio and the children were with friends, I decided to do a major cleanup of her toolbox. I was looking for a screwdriver when I came across a small jewelry box. It was locked. My heart sank. I couldn't help but open it. Inside was a thin chain with a heart-shaped pendant, and next to it, a small photograph. It showed Emily and Stephen hugging on a beach. They were laughing, their faces illuminated by the sun. Emily was wearing a white dress, and Stephen was in a blue shirt. On the back of the photo was written, "Forever, 2022. I couldn't believe my eyes. 2022 was just 3 years ago, yet we had been married for 10 years. Why did she have this photograph? And why was she hiding it so carefully? I felt the world around me begin to crumble. The next day, I went to Emily's studio while she was teaching a class. I didn't want to embarrass her. I just wanted to see what she was doing. I saw that she was painting. The painting was beautiful. It depicted a sunset on a beach, and on the sand were two silhouettes. I recognized them immediately. It was Emily and Stephen. I didn't say a word. I just left, feeling like I had no strength left. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I looked at the sleeping Emily, and she seemed like a stranger. Her face was so calm, so innocent. I couldn't understand how a person could live like that, lie like that, pretend like that. My thoughts were a mess. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to talk to her, but I was afraid of what I would hear. I decided to talk to Stephen. I invited him to lunch. He came, and we sat at the table. We talked about work, the children, life. I kept waiting for the right moment to ask him about the photograph, about the painting, about his relationship with Emily. But I couldn't. I was afraid of destroying our family. I just couldn't. When he was leaving, I couldn't stop myself. "Stephen," I said, "you know I've always been like a father to you. You've always been the best brother I could have ever imagined." "I know," he said, smiling, "and I love you." At that moment, my heart simply shattered. I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to tell her everything, lay it all out. I wanted her to see my pain, my despair, my hatred. The pain in my chest became unbearable, burning, piercing. I couldn't stand the lies, the secrets, the double life that had wrapped itself around our family like a snake. I felt deceived, trample, betrayal. Every look from Emily, every smile of hers, seemed like a mockery. How could she do this to me? How could she live with me for years, knowing that I loved her with all my soul, while she was sharing herself with another, and not just a stranger, but my own brother? The thought sent shivers down my spine. I returned home, and the silence in the house deafened me. The children were asleep. Emily was in her studio. I walked up to her studio door, but couldn't bring myself to go in. My hand froze in the air, then dropped. I knew that if I went in now, I wouldn't be able to control myself. I would just tear everything apart. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I felt a rising rage inside me, but also fear. The fear of losing everything I had. My family, my home, my idea of happiness. In the following days, I watched them. Emily, Stephen, their glances, their gestures, their awkward moments. I saw them exchange secret smiles, saw Stephen's gaze linger on Emily longer than a brother should. I saw how Emily would hide her conversations from me, how she constantly checked her phone, how she got nervous when Stephen called. It was all like a slow, agonizing torture. Every time I saw them together, I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. One evening, when Emily stepped out of the living room for a moment, Stephen walked to the window and started watching me. Then his gaze stopped at Jacob, who was playing with a toy car. He suddenly said, as if in passing, "Jacob looks so much like me, doesn't he? You know, with his restless energy." My heart skipped a beat. I looked at Jacob, then at Stephen, and in that moment, I saw something I had never noticed before. Jacob had the same expressive eyes as Stephen, the same curve of his lips, the same restless, sparkling energy that I had previously attributed to a child's nature. I had always thought he just got those traits from me or Emily, but now Now it seemed it wasn't the case. My brain refused to believe it, but something inside me already knew the truth. It was so obvious that I felt like a complete idiot who had been blind for so many years. I began to compare Jacob's facial features to Stephen's. At first, it seemed like madness, an obsession caused by my suspicion. But the more I looked, the more I saw their resemblance. The same eye shape, the same dimples when he smiled, even the way he laughed, it was all surprisingly similar to Stephen. Noah, our older son, was my spitting image, but Jacob was someone else's. I felt a wave of disgust toward both Emily and Stephen. How could they do this? How could they lie so blatantly to my face, knowing that Jacob, my youngest son, wasn't mine? My heart was clenching with pain and fury. I wanted to scream, to break everything around me, but I held back. I decided I wouldn't cause a scene until I was completely sure. I had to gather all the proof so they couldn't deny it. My mind started piecing together all the small things that had once seemed coincidental. Their accidental meetings, their secret glances, her strange absences, his frequent visits, her odd mood swings. It all formed one horrific picture. A picture of betrayal. A picture of a lie that had lasted for years. One day, I decided to come home early. I knew Stephen was supposed to stop by. I parked around the corner and waited. After a while, I saw Stephen enter our house. I waited a few more minutes, then cautiously approached the house. The door was slightly ajar. I heard their voices, quiet, intimate. I froze, listening. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone of their voices, their intonations, left no doubt. They were the voices of two people who were close, much closer than a sister-in-law and a brother-in-law. I felt the blood pounding in my temples, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to burst in and destroy everything, but I held back. I had to wait. I had to wait for the moment they revealed all their cards. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Emily, and her steady breathing seemed fake. I looked at Jacob, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib, and felt myself being torn apart. My son, my beloved son, but not mine. The thought was like a red-hot brand on my heart. I knew that my life would never be the same again. I couldn't take it anymore. The lie was eating away at me like poison, turning me into a shadow of myself. My life, which had seemed so perfect, was a facade behind which a dirty, painful truth was hiding. Every minute I spent with Emily was torture. Her touches, her kisses, her words of love, they all seemed disgusting to me. I began to look for proof, not just hints, but something undeniable. I searched through her things, her computer, her phone when she was distracted. I felt like the lowest scum, but I couldn't stop. My heart demanded the truth, and I was ready to do anything to get it. One night, when Emily was asleep, I took her phone and started looking through her messages. I knew it was dishonest, but I couldn't do it any other way. I found their correspondence. It was long, stretching back several years, and with every message I read, my world crumbled. I read their words, full of tenderness, love, and passion. I read about how they met when I wasn't home, how they planned their future, how they discussed Jacob. I read about how they were afraid I would find out, and how they would reassure each other that everything would be all right. They called Jacob our little secret, our mistake. I read how Stephen said he wanted to be a real father to his son, and Emily replied that she was afraid I would find out and take the children away from her. They even discussed the possibility of leaving together, of starting a new life, but they never went through with it, fearing they would destroy our family. In that moment, I realized that everything I had believed in was a lie. Our marriage our love, our family, it was all just an illusion. I felt empty, torn to pieces. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I just wanted to disappear. The next morning, when Emily woke up, I looked at her, and my gaze must have held so much pain and despair that she understood everything immediately. She didn't say a word, just lowered her eyes. I knew the time had come. I couldn't be silent any longer. "Emily," I said, and my voice was shaking. "I know everything. I know about you and Stephen. I know about Jacob." She looked up at me, and her eyes held a mix of fear, guilt, and relief. She didn't try to deny anything. She just nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, and tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to?" My voice got louder. I couldn't hold back. "You lied to me for years. You slept with my brother. You had his son. And you say you didn't want to hurt me." I felt rage overflowing. I screamed at her, letting out all the pain that had built up inside me. I talked about how she had destroyed my life, how she had trampled my feelings, how she had betrayed my love. I talked about how I hated her, how I hated Stephen, how I hated myself for being so blind. Emily was crying. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away. Her touch was disgusting to me. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her. I just wanted her to disappear. "Leave," I said. "Leave my house, and take your son." She looked at me in horror. "David, please don't say that. I love you. I love our children. I can't live without you." "You don't love me," I said. "You never loved me. You loved him. You always loved him. Now get out. I can't look at you anymore." She packed her things, took Jacob, who didn't understand what was happening, and left. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty doorway, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. My world was destroyed, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't figure out what to do, how to live on. I just sat in the living room, the very living room where I used to love spending time with my family, and stared at the empty wall. Every little thing in this house reminded me of her, of Jacob, of our happy life that, as it turned out, had never existed. I felt like a complete idiot, a puppet in the hands of two traitors who had been playing with me all these years. The next day, I went to work. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My thoughts kept returning to Emily, to Stephen, to Jacob. I couldn't believe they could do this to me. My brother, whom I had always loved and supported, and my wife, whom I had idolized. How could they? I left work early without saying a word to anyone. I just got in my car and drove to Steve's house. I knew they would be there. I knew they were together. I wanted to see them, to look them in the eye, to ask them how they could. I parked around the corner and waited. After a while, I saw Stephen come out of the house. He was happy, smiling. I felt rage boiling up inside me. I got out of the car and walked toward him. He saw me, and his smile disappeared. He knew that I knew everything. "David," he said, trying to approach me. "Don't come near me," I said, and my voice was cold as ice. "You betrayed me. You betrayed my family. You betrayed our friendship, our brotherhood. How could you?" Stephen lowered his head. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I don't know how it happened. We just..." "Just what?" I interrupted him. "Just slept together? Just had a son? Just deceived me for years?" He looked up at me, and his eyes held a mix of fear and guilt. "I love Emily," he said quietly. Those words were the last straw. I felt a wave of fury wash over me. I walked up to him and hit him. I hit him for all the years of lies, for all my suffering, for all my tears. Stephen didn't fight back. He just lay there, taking the blows until I stopped, breathing heavily. I looked at him, at his bruised face, and felt filled with hatred. Hatred for him, for Emily, for myself. I left him on the ground. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't live in this city, in this house, in this lie anymore. I had to leave, start a new life. A life where there would be no